Hello everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Janet. Today I'm going to be recapping the highly recommended Romantasy Quicksilver. Now I will be giving spoilers here, so if you don't want this for this book, then this might not be the video for you. But if you do need to be reminded what has happened in this book, especially before the second book comes out, or you may not have time to read the 600 pages, then welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. But maybe you also might be captivated by my storytelling and you want to go read the plots and stories yourself and form your own opinion, or perhaps you just might like a lot of smut and spice in your life. But either way, hopefully that entices you to go out and get the book and soak it up yourself. Now, firstly, let me tell you why I'm doing these summaries on this new channel, this being the first video. I am a huge fan of Stephanie So, and over her channel at Miss Mango Butt, she does these hour-long summaries of movies, series, and books, and I just love it. Also, there's another one named Carrie from Carrie Can Read, who does super detailed plot summaries of popular book talks too, and these might even go up to about 3 hours long and are great to have in the background just listening to. And so if you like that sort of stuff, please go and check out their channels. Honestly, right now there are so much media to consume these days, and I just don't have time to watch all of it. So these YouTubers who are doing these entire plot summaries for their viewers are just really doing a community service for us all, I believe. Like I said, this is my first attempt at a plot recap. We're going to start with a romantasy that is all over my TikTok for me pages right now called Quicksilver, written by Callie Hart, who writes dark romances. This book was released back in June 2024, and I believe book 2 is out soon in October 2024. And I don't really know how many books there will be, but for sure there is going to be at least 2 because the story is not quite done yet. On Goodreads, this has a rating of 4.46 stars with over 60,000 rating this book, which is quite a lot. But there are trigger warnings here. There is talks of violence for sure and adult themes. So it is suggest that people of 17 plus age range read this book. For the most part, I think this book has really great reviews. A lot of people do say that is like a fanfic of acotar, and I can see where they're coming from as it is about fays, and there are a lot of rules that apply to fairies and fays that appeared in acotar that also appear in this book. But maybe like all mystical creatures like vampires, werewolves, elves, trolls, etc., rules that apply to these creatures are across the board everywhere. But there are an extra layer here in this book, in this mystical new world, that makes it a little bit different, and I'll reveal those as we go along in the plot. Not only am I going to be telling you, of course, of the recaps of the story and the plot, but I do want to use this video to sort of debrief on my thoughts and feelings about the characters and what happens in it. I will say that I binge read acotar in 2 weeks. So there was a total of 5 books, and my heart and head was definitely attached to the characters and the storyline in that series alone. And it did take me a long time to get into this book. And when I say a while, I would say about 50% of the way in, I was still feeling a little bit like I'm not into it. But I will tell you, in the second half, if you keep going, I did start reading much faster and I became a lot more invested in the characters and in the plot because it was definitely action packed from that on, and you were definitely rooting for the characters and you wanted them to win, especially characters that you thought were a bit dull and not important. You definitely cared about them later on. So without further ado, munchkins, let's get started with the story. The book opens with this quote: "For those who live their nightmares so that others may have their dreams." The reason for this quote will become much clearer as we move through the book. The book does start with a pronunciation guide. The fact that this book requires a pronunciation guide tells me there is going to be some weird names, hard to pronounce, and I will definitely butcher them as we go along. There is not a doubt in my mind that I will definitely get some of the pronunciations wrong of this book, so bear with it or just ignore it. And as a real Australian who thinks that the word McDonald's takes too long to say and we just say Macca's, I will definitely be shortening some of the names as well. We begin the story as Sirius, the female protagonist of this story, who I love, by the way, who is definitely a badass. And she is being strangled by a guardian who is like a guard to the queen, who is also known as the Undying Queen. Why, you ask? Good question. Because she's a human queen, though, but she's been looking young and sassy and been living for over 1,000 years. How is she still alive, and what miracle cream is this biatch using? But you don't know, we don't know, the readers don't know, maybe you'll find out later. Now back to this guardian dressed in solid gold armor, including this beautiful engraved gold gauntlet, which is wrapped around our leading lady's neck. Name, age, ward, spit it out. Lower tier citizens aren't permitted in the hub, he says. Here is where the world building starts. We are introduced to Zveran, I want to say, city, a place fashioned after the shape of a wheel, and all around the city's outer limits. There are different districts. Much like the Hunger Games, these districts, though, are kept contained by really large 50-meter high walls. I'm not sure what's all of these romanticities that keep people at bay with a war, but apparently that's all it takes to keep them in their spots. We find out that this land is hut because there are not only one but two sons called Belia and Min. Keep a note. And the Guardian threatens Sirius that he will throw her in the cells where it is hot and reeks of corpses if she doesn't answer him. And this is not a place she wants to be because she's been there before. Apparently captured once and stayed in there for 8 minutes for stealing, and that was enough for her. Plus, she also doesn't want to be thrown into jail because there are people back at home that is relying on her and she cannot be incarcerated again. So she gives him a false name, Lissa Fossick, 24, single, wink. This cheeky little minx. She has to give a fake name apparently because this guy will shat himself if he knows that she was the Sierra's Fane. Apparently our FMC here is famous and doesn't want to alert the paparazzis. Ward? He demanded. The third. All right, guys, so my microphone is playing up, so I'm going to have to retake this bit again. The audio is going to sound a little bit different because we're not using a direct microphone, but it should still be good. So let's continue with the story. So immediately the guards shove Sierra's away and look startled because she's from the third. It turns out the people from the third are under heavy quarantine because they are plagued with this disease called the rattles, probably a deadly disease designed to bring down all humankind. In a panic, the guard rips off his gauntlet and drops it into the ground. Listen here, buddy, if gold cannot protect you from the rattles, then clearly there is no hope for anyone else. Then, in a blink of an eye, Sierra's is eyeballing this gold glove, and all she sees now is dollar signs. She's poor, she's starving, and she has a younger brother, Hayden, and a father-like figure named Elroy that she needs to provide for. She quickly grabs the glove and makes a run for it. In her head, she's thinking, okay, I can melt down this gold and sell it on the black market, and then I will be set for life. Or at least for the next 3 years, she'll be okay. She's running, and the guard is sort of running after her, but with this heavy armor, he is slow to execute, and she sees the wall in front of her and flings herself against it and starts to climb up the wall like some damn superhero and gets over the wall. The readers are now introduced to the third, a desert land. It gives off hot desert vibes. This is the place where the Undying Queen Madra has basically condemned the humans, and the place that she thinks that people that are beneath her will go because she is basically trying to starve them to death by rationing small amounts of food and water every day. She has deemed this area as a quarantine zone, cutting off all their means to seek any alternative resources. The inhabitants have to do obviously desperate measures in order to keep themselves alive, such as like doing underground fighting, stealing, or maybe even selling their bodies at time to exchange for mere scraps of food and water. Sirius, out of the two siblings, is the responsible one, and she looks after herself and her brother. We find out that their dad passed away a while ago, and then their mother unfortunately was killed by one of the guardians. And these two siblings deal with this in two very different ways. Sierra is a survivor, a fighter, and takes on the adult role of keeping them alive, while her brother just goes around getting himself into lots of trouble and has apparently gambling addiction, which is not great. Since she has been young, she has also been training as a fighter and can hold her own in this land of violence, and has become quite a good skilled theft, stealing water and food rations from the hub, which is basically where Madra and all her rich people live. From the age of 10, she has been working as an apprentice to Alroy as a blacksmith, so she has the skills to sort of wield swords, which comes into important things, which is important for later. Obviously, this is where she takes her gold glove. She wants Elroy to be able to melt it down so that she can sell it off. But he's like, no, Missy, you take that away from me. I am not messing around with Madra's possessions, basically, and he refuses to melt down the thing. In the past, you'll find that Elroy was a little bit more of a daredevil, creating small weapons for rebellion. But since then, I think over time, maybe the way that the world has happened, he's seen a lot of death in his life, and he has lost now the fight, and tells Sierras to get rid of it, fall in line, because what if they track you down and realize what you can do, the way you can affect metal? You're like, hang on a second, what do you mean what she can do with metal? At this point, we learn that Sierras has magical powers, a sort of weird connection to metal. This magic she doesn't really quite understand as yet, or how to activate it, but you can tell that she can manipulate metal in some ways. Explained further, and also become interesting later as well. After being lectured by Elroy for a while, she storms off because she's not getting any help here, and goes looking for her brother, who is lying in the sand outside the house of Callish. This place is where you go in the third to drown your sorrows, a speedy establishment to do some black market trading, get drunk, and at times find some pleasure for yourself. You find out Hayden has been beaten up after losing a bet with a new character we find out is named Carrion Swift, the area's notorious trickster. Now, if this book has an enemies to lovers trope for the FFC and the MMC, well, the reader has the same vibe with Carrion, because right now he is your enemy and he is annoying. Carrion is arrogant, selfish, and will 100% sell out his best friend for $1. But wait, I say hold your judgment, because you just may fall in love with him soon. I'm not the only one who feels this way. I have read a lot of reviews online that gave this book extra ratings just for this character alone. And I will say, with the evolution of Carrion, I think he became one of my favorite characters in this book, and maybe even compared to other books. But at the start, this is how we're introduced to Carrion Swift, the most notorious gambler, cheat, and smuggler in the entire city. He was also uncommonly good in bed. The only man apparently in Zavarian who ever made Sierra scream his name out of pleasure rather than frustration. I mean, okay, despite the fact that he's the most annoying man at this point, a thief, a liar, and loves himself way too much, he can still apparently get the girlies. I have to say, I did judge Sierras for dropping trowel with Carrion, because I was like, come on girl, I thought you were smarter than that. But listen, maybe I get it later on. I get his charm and why a girlie might fall for his charms and drop some trowel. This Carrion, though, he is definitely in the know. It might be annoying, but he knows what's going on. And he hints to Sierras that he knows what's been happening. I've heard a raven-haired rebel from the third viciously attacked a guardian and stole a piece of this armor, a gauntlet. Can you believe that? But of course, she wouldn't have done that. That would have been way too dangerous. But still, he offers to take the piece of gold and hide it. Of course he does. And I'm like, no, the man's just going to steal it for himself. So in my head, I'm like, do not do it. Do not trust him, regardless of what you did with him in the bedroom. Luckily, our FMC feels the same way, and she quickly skedaddles out of there. And she wants to go find a place to hide this glove now, because I think at this point, she and I are realizing it is more trouble than it's actually worth. But it's too late. The guards are there, and they capture her. But not before she puts up a really good fight. For a girl that is described as lanky and starving from the third, she's able to take down 2 of the Queen's Guard and unalive them. Even though these guards are rigorously trained, huge, with weapons, she's still able to kick some booty, because that's how much of a bad biatch she is. Despite her best efforts, though, she is captured and thrown into the palace dungeon to wait her punishment. Things are not looking too good for our girly, our FMC. Doesn't seem like she has an escape plan from the dungeons, nor does it look like anyone from the third is able to come and rescue her. After spending a torturous long time in the pitch dark dungeon, she is finally summoned by Madra, the queen. Hands bound, Sierras is dragged by the head of the guards, Captain Harrion, to a sacred temple that used to be called a Hall of Mirrors. Which sounds a lot like, to me, the Chamber of Secrets from Harry Potter, if you ask me. Except in this hall, there is a series of stone steps that lead up to a raised platform. There was something interesting, though, poking out of this platform, which was a sword. And for whatever reason, our girly Sierras was drawn to it, even maybe hearing some possible sounds coming from the sword, like a soft vibrating hum. Heron quickly steers her away and be like, don't go near that, stay away from it. And then she gets to a spot and you hear a voice. I hear a rumor. A cold, rich, feminine voice says, it's Queen Madra emerges. And she's beautiful. Like we said, aging magnificently. Certainly unnatural. Even with all the Botox and facelifts in the world, no one is going to look this good after 1,000 years. So girly, what sort of K-beauty, J-beauty products are you using to get this looking good at this age? Flawless skin, blonde silky hair and sharp eyes. But because of this, Sierra and the reader is like, something's not quite right here, but we don't know what yet. Tell me, who taught you to wield a sword? You give me details, names, meeting locations. And Girlie's like, I taught myself, okay, by watching YouTube tutorials. But no, that's not what she said, but she also gave a really lame answer, which of course the queen snorted at. I mean, what kind of royalty snorts? But the queen just goes to her, liar, and slaps Sierras. It was the FAE, wasn't it? Girlie's like, what did I hear? Did you say the FAEs? Does she also believe that there is such thing as the Easter Bunny? Really? Because to humans, this is just a fairy tale. Make-believe creatures like unicorns. She's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. There are no such things as FAEs in this world, lady. You're cray-cray. But the queen is insistent. They want this land, I assume. The FAE wish to come and take these lands from me. What do you think they will do in order to seize my throne? But then after a while, more to herself, Madra's like, no, I don't think it's the FAEs. They can't do anything against me. And she even admits to herself, this is just paranoia. So at this point, she's now bored with Sierras. She turns to Harren and says, deal with her. And when you're done with her, head back to where you found her and get rid of her people as well. Basically asking him now to get rid of all her family and friends because who cares? Obviously, this sends Sierras into a panic because she doesn't want her family to be undead. But I'm saying this, girlie, it's not the right time because you're just about to get slaughtered. But like I said earlier, this girl knows how to put up a fight. She is not going down without some sort of effort to live. Sierras does put up a great fight against Hera, despite the fact that her arms are bound and she has no weapon. But at some point, Harren does get the better of her and plunges his sword into her stomach and twists. Because on request of the queen, she doesn't just want Sierras to be unalived, she wants to hear her scream because it's music to her ears, because that's how this lady is. But Sierra suddenly starts to hear this inhumane sound, basically chanting to her, escape. Escape, escape, escape. At this point, Harren takes out a small metal dagger and he moves to try to dig it into her shoulders. But before he can do it, it suddenly stops inches from her. Some unseen force has stopped the dagger from moving towards her. How are you doing that? Isn't possible. But mate, didn't you know? This girl has powers. But no, you didn't, because you kept it a secret. Sierra doesn't know how she's doing this, but luckily it's useful. She has stopped the dagger from moving towards her. And then in her mind, she thinks, I want to unmake the dagger. So suddenly the dagger liquefies and the metal melts and starts to slide its way towards Harren and creeps up his body instead. Remember how we talked about there was that sword sticking out that platform? Well, while Harrod is being distracted because he's trying to like flick off this metal that's creeping up his body and coming up to his mouth, Sierra's on her dying breath goes to grab the sword because she thinks at least I can use it maybe as a weapon to defend myself. Like King Arthur, even though it's in solid gold, she is able to rip the sword out of the silver, and that silver then becomes to liquefy. Out of this pool of liquid, suddenly a dark figure emerges out of the pool, and Sierra's like, oh my god, it's Death. He's here to take me to the afterlife. But even though she is dying, she still has time to notice some very important details about this character and how he looks. He has shoulder-length black, silky hair, super tall, amazing green eyes, and right in the right eye, there is a rim of metallic silver. And his teeth, super white of course, because the man has great dental care, and he has sharp cannons, I want to say, canyons? Or like vampire, let's say vampire teeth, to make it easier for myself. Interesting. Sierra thinks Death is beautiful, but of course he is, because that's how he makes people go with them to the afterlife. Then for whatever reason, Death reaches into the chest plate and holds out a silver chain. He takes it off himself and puts it around Sierra's. Then he grabs the sword and disappears with her into this pool of silver and takes her into basically a whole new world. Cue the Aladdin soundtrack, people. Sierra wakes up in Valeria, I want to say, the Winter Palace, aka the land of never-ending winter. Goodbye, scorching desert. Hello, frostbite. She is greeted by a chatty blonde sitting next to her bed. Initially, Sierra thinks that this is still the palace, and this is one of Madra's maid who passes her suddenly a cup of fresh water, and she's shocked because water is like gold where she comes from. How is this lady just offering her such a large cup of water? But she doesn't care or question it because she is thirsty and gulps it down before this lady can change her mind. I'm Everlaney. I've been visiting you. I'm going to shorten Everlaney's name to Laney because a lot of the characters in the books also refer to it that way, and it's easier for my life and my mouth to say that name instead of Everlaney. Not that this is one of the probably easier names to pronounce in the book, I would say. As you can see, I was stumbling over other words. But Sierra is now staring at Laney and whispers, ooh, your ears. Sierra's darling, where are your manners? Didn't anyone tell you not to stare when somebody has a feature is different to yours? You don't just sit there and point it out and make them feel uncomfortable. But yes, Laney has pointed ears because, shock horror, she's a fae. Up to this point, humans have heard about faes, but none of it was positive. They've been told that these faes are cannibals, beastly creatures with no sense of morality or notion of mercy, which is not great. But Sirius is still staring at Laney and be like, show me your teeth. Laney was like, no way, so rude, Sirius. Why are you doing that? But it turns out in this world, faes not only have pointed teeth, they're beautiful, they're tall, they're elegant, like all other faes, but they do have vampire teeth. Because it turns out in this land, the faes were cursed with a thirst for blood, and they did hunt humans and drink their blood. But luckily someone did find an antidote which stopped them from craving blood, but they did keep the teeth. Here though, faes do not have wings, they're not able to fly, no Tinkerbell action right here. But they do have magic and they have amazing healers in this land, which is lucky for Sierra's because now she's healed. Hallelujah, she will live another day. Otherwise, I would say this is a very short and uneventful book if the FMC dies so early on. But a monster suddenly opens and bursts into the room. But it turns out it's not a monster, it is another fae, a male fae named Renthus. I came to find the human. He needs his chain back. Now remember how Death took off a chain and put it around Sierra's neck before he stepped into the silver? But now it turns out that man wants his accessories back. Sierra takes off the necklace, hands it over to Renthus, but he doesn't, or Renthus, but he doesn't want to touch it. He instead puts it into a pouch. Interesting. And then he just walks away. Laney says, you've been unconscious for 10 days, but at this point you need to freshen up because you stink. And we're about to go see my father, the King of Valerian, Bellicone de Barrow. Barrow? I think. Laney puts Sierra in a frilly dress, does her hair and says, okay, brace yourself, it's time to meet the king. As I said, the start of the book is a bit draggy and a lot of information is thrown at you at this point, maybe to build the world. But at times, I wasn't sure the importance of the facts that we're giving you. And I was thinking, are you just filling in words because you had like a minimum word requirement for this book? And these are just fillers. But some facts at the start of the book are important because they end up at the end as something you need to recall. So I'm going to talk about it here as what I thought was important. As Lainey is leading Sirius through the palace to get to the king, they pass a corridor of statues. Each time Lainey walks past the statues, she presses her index and middle finger to her forehead and does a little bow. Who are they? Sirius asks. Duh, the gods, of course. It turns out in the past, the humans did also pray to these gods, but their temples were swallowed up by the deserts a long time ago, and their names were fast forgotten. Most likely something that Madra fashioned, because in that land, she wants nobody else to worship anything but her as a god. Lainey says, even though sand and wind swept away the names of the gods, I assure you, Madra knows them. Implying then two things, that we were right, Madra wants to be worshipped as a god, and also Lainey in the Feywild has heard of this undying queen. And it turns out from her tone, Lainey is not a fan of Madra. She goes along giving names of the gods, and then she steps in front of two beautiful female statues and says, these two are considered as one god. Belamithian twin sisters, goddess of the sky. Once a single god, but then during a storm, Belmithian refused to take shelter from the storm, and there were spirits in the storm that got mad and a little bit salty that this god was not cowering before them, and struck her with lightning over and over and over again until she split into two, becoming Bel and Mithian. Bel is the goddess of the sun, and Mithian is the goddess of the moon. Bel, Mithian. Belia, Min. So remember the two suns in Zelvarium that I mentioned? Well, it was named after these two gods. Interesting. Then there was one more god whose face, though, was pointed to the wall. That's Zareth, god of chaos and change. You don't want to look at that god directly in the face because it draws too much attention to yourself, which is basically asking for trouble and chaos. They respect him and touch him on the feet and bow, but they don't draw too much attention upon themselves by looking at him straight in the eye. Which I get, people. Do not mess with gods and do not anger them. After all these history lessons, we finally find out why the king wants to chat with Sirius. Sirius has a task to do. When she pulled the sword and the solid silver liquefied into a pool of silver sludge, she awoken what they called the Quicksilver, hence the name of this book. I do have to say, with this book, because on the front cover is a male crying a bit of silver, I thought Quicksilver was the name of the male lead in the book. Much like, I think there's a Quicksilver superhero, but no, in this book, Quicksilver refers to this element that is important in the story. And I have read online that Quicksilver is a reference in modern lives in our world, similar to Mercury, or maybe the author thought about Mercury and sort of created this Quicksilver around it. Because just like Quicksilver and Mercury in this land, if you come in contact with this element, there are a high chance that you'll go a little bit cray-cray in the head. Mercury apparently was also used by the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, hence why he was a little bit kooky and a little bit mad, and how he, gained his name, the Mad Hatter. Right, just a little tidbit, not that important for the story of this book, but yeah, just something interesting to tell you. This book though, the Quicksilver is a portal that allows Faes and humans to move through different realms, and Madra 1,000 years ago closed these portals so that the Fae could not move freely and was basically trapped wherever they were at that point in time. Now imagine on that day you are traveling into another realm, doing business, visiting someone else, not your family, and you're away from your home and your family, and the portal suddenly closed, and then you have no transportation to come home. So imagine you flew overseas and suddenly they're like, okay, from now on for the next 1,000 years, there will be no more transport for you to get back. Nothing. You're stuck where you are. Except this is in a whole different realm and a different world with different creatures. How salty would you be? As a Fae, maybe 1,000 years is not too much for you because you can live for thousands and thousands of years. But if you are human, you will be so mad because you don't have 1,000 years to wait. And that's where you are for the rest of your life. The king, though, is skeptical. He doesn't think that a mere mortal like Sierras was able to open these portals, but they have to make sure. So Sierras is now stuck in this land and tasked to restore all the portals if she can, which apparently there are lots to open and restore. But Sierras is reluctant to take on this task because she wants to get back home to her brother and Elroy. But the king just says to her, don't worry about it. They're not there anymore. The queen has just destroyed the third, as she promised to do. Obviously, the FMC is devastated, but no time for that because something important is about to happen. Now, after 90 pages, almost 100, we are finally introduced to the male lead. We see Death, aka Kingfisher, is introduced to the story. I don't know why the author decided to name him Kingfisher. I don't think it quite suits the character in this book, considering how elf-like other names are or exotic the other names are. Whereas Kingfisher, just makes me think of fish and the ocean, and there's no reference to why he will be called that, but that is his name and that's what we'll call him, or at times I'll call him Fisher just to shorten it and make the story a little bit faster because it's easier for my mouth to say. But like I said, this is why I think the book takes a while to get there, because there's 100 pages in and we only just meet the male lead, and it was draggy to get here. So let's picture this. Guards are dragging in a guy who's kicking and raging like he's auditioning for a rock band. But wait, he's hot still. Like seriously, it's Death himself. The crowd starts to murmur and suddenly they're all chanting his name. Kingfisher, Kingfisher. Turns out this crazy hottie is Kingfisher. But hold up, folks. This Kingfisher isn't exactly in his right mind. Nope. He looks like he's gone a little bit bonkers, a little bit deranged, doesn't know where he is, wild in his eyes. The crowd is pulling back, thinking that he's a terrifying monster. He's been exiled for over a century since this mysterious event called Gallithrian? But now he's back. The crowd erupts in chaos, with some shouting, kill him, banish him. But then you have a few brave souls whispering, mercy. Lainey is worried that her father is going to kill Kingfisher. So she eyeballs this old lady that's also sitting next to the king on the throne. And she whispers, Melway, do something, please. So reluctantly, this old lady gets up because maybe she's old and she's tired, but she gets up eventually, goes up to the king and be like, no, we can't kill him yet. The sword speaks to me. So remember that special sword that Sierra's pulled out of the silver? Yeah, this sword apparently speaks to people and has a mind of its own, and talks to Melway, who is an oracle in this land. Melway implies that the sword has spoken, so that Kingfisher cannot die today. The pendant, though, it must be returned, she declares. Turns out the pendant around Kingfisher that he gave to Sierras contains some powerful magic. It keeps the madness in him at bay. How does it work? Well, I'll explain that later on. But enter Renfield, who is a general of the land and has been fighting on the borders, keeping the war at bay. The FAE are at war. Of course they are, because it's a romantasy and there's always war here. There's been a war with Sena's Roth for a long time, but according to Lainey, the FAEs are always at war, as I said, and this is just part of life at the Winter Palace. So nothing to fret about, apparently, to her. Kingfisher was also there fighting the war a century ago too, but something happened and then he got banished. Renfield, though, convinces the king maybe better to use Kingfisher's skill and bring him back to the borders. So the king goes, okay, a week then. You take him back with you in a week. Since he knows so much about the Quicksilver, he needs to stay here and help Rosarius, who is an old librarian, deal with the girl first. The second she's capable of waking the pool herself, Kingfisher will be banished from this land and back to the war zone, basically. So for now, Kingfisher is saved from the untimely death. The pendant is returned to his neck and he seems to be calm. Looks like Sierras is destined to be bound to Kingfisher, or at least for the next week. And here is where we start the classic enemies to lovers trope. Romance, anybody. I think this part of the book for the next few chapters is really dragging on, and probably the most uninteresting part of the book. The attention, I assume, of these next few chapters is to create a lot of world building, development of the characters, and of course the slow burn relationship between Sierras and Kingfisher. However, I found that the interactions between the two main leads was not cute as I want it to be, that I've seen in other books, where instead there's a lot of unnecessary dirty talk rather than building up trust or tension, for example. So I think at this point in time, there is a lot of interactions between Sirius and Kingfisher that was meant to, I think, create some banter between the two or create some character development, but I didn't feel it as adorable or as cute or as interesting or even funny as some of the other banters that I've read in other books, and it did bore me a little bit. Maybe because the character Kingfisher was quite boring, and the only thing that he seemed to have been offered in this book at the start is a lot of smut talk. He just likes to talk dirty as opposed to be a sort of jovial, sort of happy character. He's just grumpy, uninterested in anything, but still demanding of Sierra's and what she can do for him, basically. For example, early on, Kingfisher says, if he chooses to answer one of Sierra's questions, it will always be the truth. The question then Sierra's asks is, how big is your eggplant? Which is, his member. And he's like, are you asking me how big my eggplant is? Apart from obvious smut talk, how does this establish trust between the two characters, I'm saying? Whatever Kingfisher says as the answer, in order to validate the answer, you have to do two things. You have to get him to drop his trowel and get a measuring tape out and work out if he's telling the truth. So if he's not going to do that and you're not going to do that, then this is a pointless question and a pointless conversation. And it doesn't really move the story forward. The answer Kingfisher gave was, it's big enough to make you scream and then some, which only establishes that he's got a dirty mouth and he thinks quite highly of himself. But darling, if you have to brag about it, maybe you're not that good. So let me skip to the important part or interesting facts that I think is required to move the story along or interesting for the plotline of this book. We find that the Sierras is an alchemist. Historically, only Faes are alchemists, so it is likely that she does have a bit of Fae blood in her. Also, the sword, which is from the Fae world, named Solace, is from the Fae world. And if she wasn't of Fae descent, as a human being, if you touch that sword that was magical, it would automatically burn your hand. But the fact that she was able to grab onto the sword and it didn't cause her any harm proves that she is very likely that she has Fae DNA in her. Otherwise, it would have left a scar and she would not have been able to hold it. Alchemists can activate Quicksilver. However, the Faes don't have anything written down in their boring libraries that actually explain how it activates or is even controlled. The only way to find out how to do that is through a lot of trial and error, which we see throughout this book, which is sometimes unnecessary. Alchemy is a form of magic, forgotten and old magic that became even a myth in the Fae world. There are 3 branches of alchemists that live in this world. Firstly, there are Faes who sought to discover the path to immortality. Even though, Faes live for thousands of years, they don't live forever. Their 1,000 years might not even be enough for these Faes, which is why some of them have spent their whole lives trying to work out how to live forever. And then you have Faes who sought to create and invent and transmitting various metals and ores, which is something that it seems like CRS is likely to be. Transmitting means to be able to alter metals to precious metals that can turn metal into silver and gold, which is quite useful. And then the book, though, has no record of which components were used, but at some point they could merge even metal with Quicksilver. But again, there is no record of how they can control this Quicksilver to be merged such a long time ago. Alchemists can use Quicksilver to forge with Fae warrior weapons to make it even more powerful and magical, which is what I think Solace is. It's not just a sword on its own, it's a sword that probably has elements of Quicksilver in it, which is why it can stop portals. And then you have the Fae alchemists who spent their lives sorting ways to cure illnesses and disease. Although it is a volatile element, the stuff is dangerous if it comes in contact with the skin, much like mercury, as I said earlier, and it can make any living creature insane. So how do you travel then through this Quicksilver without going mad? You need to wear relics, which Fisher has. Remember the pendant that he had earlier? This was an ancient relic that was given to him by his mother to basically work as an armor from the Quicksilver when he has to step through the portals. And apparently he has to step through the portals quite a lot in his pass. Unfortunately, at one point, he was forced to travel the pathway without his relic on, and the Quicksilver did get into him and onto him. The healers of the land managed to draw out most of it, but not all of it, which is why you see a silver rim around his green eye, which makes him insane at times where he doesn't have his pendant on. The pendant will calm the noises that is in his head. Without it, he can't distinguish what is real and not real in his mind at that time. Sierra has an invested interest in the Quicksilver, obviously. She wants to know how to open up the portal so that she can now go back to the third and see Hayden and Elroy and make sure that they are still alive, or did the Queen keep her promise and actually destroy her hometown? Madra used the magical sword, as we said, Solace, to seal the pathway a long time ago, but since the sword now has been returned to the FAE world and they have an alchemist, it looks like probably the portals can be once again open. The King Bellicone wants to open up the portals because he wanted to start a war with Madra for tricking him 1,000 years ago when she closed the doors basically between the two lands, between humans and the Faes, where they used to use it for trade, which was important for the economy. Also, the other investment is there used to be a Delius heir in Valeria, who is the true king actually of the Winter Palace, who is a threat to Belliconians' right to the throne. So it turns out I think Bellicone wants to go into that land, Zeverian, and hunt down the rabbit, wants to hunt down the heir to the real throne and basically get rid of them because they may one day come and take their throne back. Kingfisher also has a magical sword like Solace, and it's called Nimarella, similar to Cinderella, but Nimarella. When the portal was closed and the Quicksilver went quiet and solidified, all the weapons that were forged with Quicksilver back in the Fae land seemed to have lost their magical powers, but not obviously Solace, which was in the Quicksilver that was holding the portal at bay, but Kingfisher's sword Nimarella was still magical, which also made him more of a powerful warrior in this land. Because it turns out whatever weapon that you have, if it's with Quicksilver and it's deemed as your sword, there is nobody else that's able to wield that weapon except yourself, which is why Kingfisher is also a much more efficient warrior in this land. Kingfisher, you find out a little bit more about him, and it's not pleasant because he's grumpy and he's rude and he's cruel to everyone, including the people that are closest to him, which is annoying to me as a character. I think that you can be aloof to people that don't matter to you. You can definitely be rude to the people that are cruel to you, like the king, for instance. But for people that care about you and that want the best for you, I don't know why you're rude to them. There's no need to be angry all the time. It makes for a not endearing character, whereas in other characters where the male lead is grumpy, he's at least not grumpy to his inner circle and he's quite sweet to them. And then as he grows, because then it proves that he's like a loyal fella or pleasant eventually once you get to know him. But at this point in time, it felt like even if you got to know him, he is not pleasant. He's just annoying. And I didn't really like Kingfisher at all for the good 50% of the book, I was saying. So he's rude to Sierras, even though he needs her. He doesn't even bother to learn her name. Instead, he calls her a nickname, which is a Shelith or Osha for a short, which is a type of butterfly. They hatch and die in one day. So Sierras is like, are you calling me a fragile butterfly that can't even live for more than one day, and thinking that he's just calling her a weak because she's human and she is smaller and she has no magical powers and she's quite fragile, which he refers to because she's just a human. So either he calls her this nickname Osha or he calls her human, but never her name, which is super annoying to Sierras. Also, Kingfisher and Lainey are brother and sister, or steps at least. Same mother but different father, which makes Bellicone Kingfisher's the mean stepfather who despises him because Kingfisher also will be a threat to his throne. Clearly there is some family drama here. And then you find out Lainey and Kingfisher are old because they're Fae. Lainey is 1,480 years old. Kingfisher is even older at 1,733 years old. But because they are Fae and they are magical, they don't look their age. No one does. No one looks like their age, obviously, in the Fae world. Even though they're that much older, Kingfisher looks around 30. Lainey looks around, Sierras' age was around 24, 25, for example. Apart from the king wanting Sierras to open up the portals, Kingfisher has his own agenda with Sierras. He wants Sierras to basically merge the Quicksilver with his warriors' weapons that are fighting the war to make them more powerful. in this book, like I said, it's draggy, mainly also because they're only set in two places. They're always in the palace. They're either at the library with the old librarian trying to work out alchemy and how it works, and loading Sierras up with some new facts that they know about but nothing too useful, or they're in the forge where Kingfisher and Sierras are working, and he spends a lot of that time trying to train her into making sure that she knows how to control this Quicksilver, even though no one really knows. He's just forcing her to work with it. He starts by putting a small speck of it on her hand, and immediately it feels like it's burning and freezing her at the same time, so a weird sensation. When Sierras is near Quicksilver, though, she can hear it talking to her. A million voices are saying this chant, Anaroth, Anaroth more, Anaroth more. It chants over and over again, but no one knows what that means at the moment. Eventually, though, she discovers that if she commands it, she can control the Quicksilver Elise to ask her to be in solid form or liquid form by just with her mind and thinking those thoughts. Reader now starts to find out more about Kingfisher. His mother was previously married to his father, a southern lord. The king Bellicone sent his father on a mission to Zilverian, and he never returned. That's also the same time where the gateway closed. So therefore the king blamed Kingfisher's father for this and declared him a traitor to the FAE world. Less than a year later, the king was engaged to Kingfisher's mother. The king basically said to the mum, the only way she can prove that she wasn't a traitor is to marry him. So basically blackmailing her to doing this. But in reality, he didn't want to marry her because he loved her. He wanted their fortune because Kingfisher's father and mother are very, very rich. And marrying his mother means that he now gets access to all her assets. Obviously, the king has no interest in being a stepfather to Kingfisher's son. And Kingfisher's mom unfortunately passes away shortly after giving birth to Lainey due to complications of the birth. So like I said, as you're reading through, you feel like you're just at this one point not moving on from the plot. You're in the library, you're in the forge. That is it. And then you have some pointless bickering between the two leads where they're both just proving that they're enemies to each other at this point. Sierras is also getting sick of being in the library because she wants to get back to her home and wants to know how people actually travel through the portals. Apparently, it's as easy as thinking about the place they want to go and stepping through the Quicksilver. Or even if it's a place that you've never been, but you want to think about what the kind of place it's going to be, then you can step through and try to get there. But that's not very scientific or even accurate, because at times in the past, alchemists have done this and they've stepped through the portal and then they disappeared. But for Sierra, she's like, it should be fine because I've heard enough. I know where I'm going. I want to go back to the third. She knows where it's been. She's been there before and she wants to get back to the bra. So now her next mission is to find the portal in Valeria. Bellicone apparently has the largest ever documented pool of Quicksilver, as it can transport whole armies through the realms. And it is the bowels of the palace. Here is how she is going to plan to escape to go back to her hometown. But before she goes and does that and execute her plan, she has one more thing she needs. So Sierra's plan is full steam ahead, where she plans to escape through the Quicksilver. But like I said, she needs to do one more thing. So she starts to head down to the forge. And as she gets into the forge, surprisingly, Kingfisher is already there, working hot and sweaty, working up a sweat, and she's staring at him as the sweat runs down his face. And he turns around and says, you could at least say hello before you start faxing me. See, dirty mouth. Then he takes his shirt off and she's eyeballing him, looking at all those tattoos over his body and studying a little bit too intently, if you ask me. Sierra's is all turned on by the sight of this, although she's trying very hard to deny herself of how she feels about Kingfisher and his bodily godness at the moment. They apparently have great nose smells, and he can smell the arousal though in the air. And what does that smell like, I ask you? Maybe I don't want to know. As I iterated before, why Kingfisher is so interested in Sierra's alchemy skills, it's not because he cares about Bellicone's plan and his war, but he has plans of his own. He wants to use Sierra's alchemy skills to forge weapons and relics with the Quicksilver, and also open up the portal so that he can get his hands on more weapons and supplies to help win the war, not for Bellicone, but for his own people. There are people back at the front line that is counting on him, that he wants to protect. Suddenly though, a little white fox appears in the forge. Kingfisher immediately draws his sword to try to kill the fox, as he sees it as a pest. Now, I don't really think the fox has any purpose in this story except to be an adorable, a new companion for Sierra's, but maybe also to show the softer side of Kingfisher. Deep down, even though past his rudeness, he has a heart, and even deeper down, a soft spot for her, because he doesn't attack the fox. Instead, he uses his magic to create a cage to put the fox in with food and water. Then they go back to binding Quicksilver with items to create relics. But turns out harder than you think. The Quicksilver is stubborn and doesn't want to be binded with anything at this point in time. Sierra's asked to look at Fisher's pendant suddenly. If you want it, come here and touch it. His lips parted, his gaze boring into Sierra's, waiting to see what she would do. Insert obvious sexual tension right here in this scene, but I'm here for it. Obviously, we know that Fisher can't take off the pendant, so Sierra's needs to get up nice and close if she wants to have a look at it. Here is an opportunity to increase the sexual tension, right? This scene could have been written in any other way, but for Sierra's to inspect this pendant, but no, this is how the writer wanted to go. So Kingfisher grabs a stool, he sits down and spreads his leg. So Sierra's can stand between them and gets nice and close to his chest because he is so big, the man has to sit down for her to be at that level. You can't just bend down a little bit, buddy, for her to grab onto the pendant. No, this is the way to go. But let's not forget, this is the point of the story, for there to be tension and for him to also be shirtless. She's so close to him she can smell him, and apparently he smells good, light, musk and sweet. What do you know about FAE anatomy, Osha? We're bigger, taller, of course. Our eyesight is far superior to yours. Our sense of smell, he said, his eyes lowering down her body. We can hear each other's heartbeat. Then he grabs her wrist, not aggressively to hurt her, but to get her to feel his heartbeat, which was steady compared to hers, which is moving now at a rapid pace. Maybe because you just grabbed her wrist, sir. Then he puts his hand on her chest, right between her lady loves. Excuse me, inappropriate. Did you ask for consent? I don't think so. But he says, I hear it bouncing around all over the place when you look at me. I've forked plenty of humans. Does that surprise you? Of course it's surprising because he seems to think so little of them. I don't hate your kind. I'm just disappointed by how breakable you are. If I held you down and forked you the way I'm imagining forking you right now, I doubt you would survive. Sir, are you in heat at this moment? What's with the talk?
Ugh, so thirsty.
Now this banter goes on for a few more paragraphs. If you want details, of course, go read the book. It is chapter 12 if you want to skip all the other sections and just get to the point. But one sexual innuendo to another and suddenly, ba-bam, they are kissing. This is their first kiss, of course. And then Sierra is saddling on him and grinding up against him. But she snaps back to her senses and quickly backs away from him, and it ends there. And that's all the action you're getting out of this chapter. But don't worry, there'll be more. As soon as Fisher leaves, Sierra is alone and she makes a fast bolt for it, to where you asked, to the basement of the castle. She plans to awaken the Quicksilver and get home. She's packed a bag already, stuffed also her new fox pet in there, and off she goes. She doesn't know where the Quicksilver is, but as she's heading down the castle, remember how the Quicksilver talks to her? She can hear it and basically telling her where to go. They're practically saying warmer or colder to the location where they are at. She finally gets to the pool of solid Quicksilver and she spoke to it. Wake up. 1 minute the Quicksilver is in solid form, and the next, bam, it's in liquid silver. This is it. Time for Sierra to get home to her family. She hovers her foot above the surface, inches from it. Her slipper brushes against the silver, but suddenly a wave of black glitter becomes evident and slams her into her and knocks her down. It's Kingfisher. He's mad. You owe me your life. How dare you try to escape him, is basically what he's saying. But Sierra is defiant, and she's defiant, and no matter what, she's leaving. And you are a lying thief looking down at Sierra's thumb. Apparently, when Sierra was grinding up against Kingfisher earlier, it wasn't just because the girl is just thirsty for this male. She was distracting him while she robbed him of this ring, which she also believes is another relic, much like his pendant, which allows her to cross the Quicksilver without going mad. But it turns out it's a fake. It has none of those prevention powers. Originally, Kingfisher did tell Lainey that the ring does have some power, but he was just lying to her to make her feel okay that she didn't have his pendant with her. But in reality, that is not the case. So you travel through without your pendant to save me? No, not to save you, to save my friends, to end my exile, to fork and live or die. Finally, this way or another. It has nothing to do with you. This guy, the eternal charmer to women. Regardless if he did this to save her or not, Sierra declares she's never going to stop trying to escape, and she won't help him make relics no matter what he does to her. Alright, fine. You get one. Kingfisher has decided he will make a deal with Sierra. He will go back through the Quicksilver to Zavarian and send one of her family members and bring them back to Valeria. She makes a deal with him to help him stay and make relics and weapons as he wanted. This is Sophie's choice for Sierra. Is it Hayden or is it Aroy? In the end, she does decide on Hayden. He is the brother after all. And he's younger and has a little bit more life to live. I go and try to get your brother. You help me and assist me in any way I ask you to, and you do as you're told. Agree to this pact. So they do a blood promise basically, and they seal it with blood, with their cuts on the hand, as they always do. It's a magical bond between Kingfisher, Mr. I'm Death, deal with it. And then Kingfisher disappears through the Quicksilver, leaving Sierra there with the fox as her only companion for the next hour or so. And then during this time, she's like, I'm going to name you Onyx, which is quite a cute name for the little fox. But so an hour passes, suddenly he reappears, looking disheveled and like he's gone through some hellish battle. But he has done it. He brought a human male back and dumps him on the floor unconscious. Hallelujah, Sierra is finally going to be reunited with her brother. Finally, she's not alone in this palace. And she's eyeballing the boy. This is not my brother, Fisher. This is Carrion faxing Swift. You know that dirty, rotten scoundrel that Sierra had a one-night stand back at the start of the book? Is this possibly a love triangle trope here? Let's see, which is what I thought the author was trying to do. So it turns out as Kingfisher stepped through the Quicksilver, he was greeted with 50 of the king's guards, which is why he had to combat it to find Sierra's brother, looking a bit disheveled now. Then he had to track down her bloodline, and it led him to this man for some reason, who lied and said he was Hayden, which is why he brought him back. The deal, however, still stands. If you read the fine print that Kingfisher only needs to attempt to rescue Hayden and not actually bring him back. This is why, people, you have to read the terms and conditions whenever you're making a bond, especially a blood bond. Now everyone is stuck with Carrion, which is great for the reader because he is your comic relief for this book. Up to this point, all the characters are very angsty or rude or a little bit dull, but here is someone who is a lot more chilled and with humor, and once he gains consciousness, he will be great. Fisher has no intention of trying it again because he's about to grab Ren, Sierras, and now Carrion and escape this castle before Bellicone exiles him. He puts Sierras on a horse, straps the unconscious Carrion to the back of his own horse, and away they go. And of course, luckily, Onyx goes with them too, which is cute. Sierra's Kingfisher hit the road together, and let's just say it's not a smooth ride. They're not exactly besties. Imagine being tied to someone who thinks they're better than you. They basically travel now for hours. Sierra's butt is now numb, feeling a little sore, human. I'll happily kiss all your aches and pains better for you once we strike camp. I've been told my mouth has healing properties, especially when administered between a pair of thighs. So there we go again, being all thirsty again. Huh? They reach Kingfisher's hometown, a place called Cahlish. The land is watered by Kingfisher's father, as was suspicious Bellicone. So Bellicone or his supporters could not cross into this land. The only problem is that Cahlish is also a battlefront. Not the safest place for anyone to be at, but fun times ahead, we assume. But even though back at the Winter Palace, everybody acted like Kingfisher was a crazy monster. But in his hometown, he was a savior, a warrior that saved many lives, and a lot of the Fae treated him like a living god. Sirius starts to realize that Kingfisher maybe isn't all that bad. Now let me tell you about the Shadowgate. It's literally a gateway to different lands in the Fae world. Using it makes the journey a lot faster. Within seconds, you're at one point A and you can go all the way to point D just by traveling through it. Whereas by normal means, the trip could take months, but with this Shadowgate, quick as a flash. From the outside looking through, all you can see is a whirling black vortex when you walk through the gates. Sierra is obviously scared to step through it, which makes perfect sense, but Fisher has no empathy for her and shuffles her through the gates. The first time you step through these gates, it scrambles your brain and makes you nauseous as hell. And the feeling is even worse for a human because we don't have the super faith powers. Good news is that the more you do it though, the less it affects you. The first time Sierra's uses it is when they have to travel to Kingfisher's hometown. Even though Sierra's basically passes out from crossing through it, Kingfisher just merely steps over her and doesn't seem to give a damn. Gotta say, MMC, you are really unlikable at this moment. Again, arrogant leading man, brooding, fine, but a plain rude guy with zero personality isn't working for me at this point in time. According to Ren though, he used to be kinder, but Quicksilver is to blame apparently because it's starting to make him grumpy and mad. But who cares about Kingfisher? Because Carrion is awake. What the hell were you playing at telling Fisher that you were hated? Don't get mad, girly. Carrion was the hero here. He was actually trying to protect him from Fisher, who looked like a psycho monster when he stepped through, that was going to murder Hayden rather than rescue him. So Carrion took his spot, so unselfish of the guy, and said, look, I am Hayden. But Carrion gives Sierra some good news. Turns out her brother and Elroy are alive. Madra didn't destroy the third as she threatened after all. Carrion managed to forge some fake passports for her brother Hayden, and he's now living in another district, the 7th. Another district obviously better than the 3rd because Hayden is now working as a store clerk there. A very average job, very normal, and making his own money and no longer starving. Elroy, though, is still in the 3rd and goes to the gates to see if he can sweet talk the guards and letting him see Sierra's at the palace. But obviously, at this point, she is not there. The world is still turning without Sierra's there, which is hopefully keeping her at bay a little bit longer and not so stressed now about what's happening to her loved ones. It's now Sierra's time to tell him about her adventures, and she does. She tells her everything, right down to her plan to escape. The first thing Carrion says is though, so you kissed the guy then? The one with the creepy sword and the bad attitude? Seriously, what's that got to do with anything? Exactly my thought. Carrion is jealous maybe? Or is this to give us some sort of love triangle vibes in this book? Because I think I'm actually here for it. There is jealousy though, of course, coming from Kingfisher, because we all know Carrion is a flirt and he openly does it in front of Kingfisher. What does he care? Although Kingfisher tries to hide it, the reader can tell it irks him when he flirts with Sierras. Regardless of this jealousy though, he allows Carrion to now assist Sierras on running tests to try to make relics with the Quicksilver, since at this point they have not worked out anything on how to bind it with the weapons. So the more the merrier. I swear, Kingfisher says, I will release you and allow you and Carrion to return to Zavarian the moment you have made relics for my people. The scene finally changes and the reader goes to Cahlish, Kingfisher's hometown, and I will say that at this point more characters are introduced and the plot line moves and it's getting a little bit more interesting now for the reader. Kingfisher's estate is beautiful because don't forget he is rich, built by his great-great-grandfather, and When I say rich, he's rich. He even has a butler named Archer, who reminds me a little bit of Dobby from Harry Potter, who is a little fire spirit who adores his master because upon seeing him, he throws his tray of tea down and throws his little arms around Kingfisher's neck and sobs hysterically out of joy because he clearly has not seen this guy for over a century. Surprisingly though, Kingfisher, instead of shoving this affection away, he returns the hug. So he does maybe have a heart after all. In this land, you find out there are fire spirits, water spirits, air spirits, and occasionally earth spirits, all different lesser FAE creatures. There is also a forge at Kingfisher's estate. Of course there is, because that's what rich people have. Tennis courts, pools, and forges all around. This one though, compared to the Winter Palace, was even bigger and with much more equipment for Sierras now to run her experiments. In the corner of this forge was a huge wooden trunk. Inside sat a mountain of silver rings of different shapes and sizes. 1,800 rings was in that trunk alone. And apparently there are 8 more trunks of them on benches on the other side. Why is this important, you ask? Turns out these rings need to be turned all into relic for Kingfisher's soldiers to cross through the Quicksilver. Remember that deal that he made with Sierras? You can leave once you've made me the relics I needed. Well, this is how many he requires in the bond. Fisher, no! There are nearly 15,000 rings here. You really need to look at the fine print, girlie, before you make deals with Kingfisher. He's clearly devious. But at this point, this poor soul doesn't even know how to turn even one relic yet. So how's she going to do 15,000? While he goes, you better get to work. Heartless, I tell you. Sierra spends a lot of time trying to get Quicksilver to bond with a bunch of different materials. All this is trial and error. Although there are many books about alchemy that is written, it is not in the language that she understands, so it is pointless. And the task feels really impossible and nothing is happening. Rain is telling Fisher, you need to be nicer to Sierras. And when he says be nice to her, he basically means, Sierras, you need to go to dinner with him. And Fisher, for some reason, agrees. But I think if you want to be nice to her, maybe help her work out a way to do and make relics. But no, of course, this is a romantic story. So of course, they're going to have dinner together. Have dinner at this very long, extravagant table where Fisher was seated at one end and Sierra's is all the way at the other. Sounds about right. How royal of them. But Sierra's, you know, she's not like other girls. There's no way she's going to be sitting this apart and having a conversation. So she picks up her plate and plonks it onto the table to his right. Also, the man here has wine, so she wanted to get her wine with her dinner. Perhaps it's the wine talking here, but suddenly Sierras is getting all giddy around Kingfisher, noticing suddenly how handsome he is, especially with those vampire-like teeth. Maybe it's because suddenly she realized how rich Kingfisher is, and he has this gigantic estate and a butler.
Now I ain't saying she a gold digger.
Sierras and Kingfisher are sitting at dinner making googly eyes at each other. A bunch of fire spirits come in to deliver the food and they all start hyperventilating because the human girl dares to sit right next to their master. Kingfisher though seems to be mighty amused by their reaction but tells them, don't worry, fine, just relax. Did they think I was going to stab you with my fish fork? Fire spirits are just very emotional. They love to overreact, that's all. Now the conversation moves to Carrion. Sierra says Kingfisher should let him at least go back because he has a grandmother back at home and I'm sure she's looking for him. I'm honestly surprised that you would want him to leave. Kingfisher acts all nonchalant about this, but you know inside he's seething with jealousy. He mentioned that you were infatuated with him. I love these books where everyone can tell that the MMC is giving jealousy vibes, but the strong MMC is like the only one oblivious to this fact and his behavior. So it turns out the reason why Kingfisher also thought Carrion was Sierras' brother was because he smelt her pheromones on him. He had it on himself when she was grinding up on him and when she was trying to steal the ring. So he had that smell. And then when he smelt it on Carrion, he thought, oh, This must be your brother after they had their one night stand and the pheromone was still sitting on a carrion. Firstly, I asked, did you not bathe, carrion? Secondly, if Fisher smells pheromone on another male, why would you automatically think that that male was her brother? Why would her pheromone be on her brother? Or does blood and pheromone smell the same? So many questions, but none of them were answered in this book. But also, it doesn't really matter to keep the story going. There is no way you can still smell me on him, Sierra says. There is every way. I know the smell of you anywhere. On anyone. I'll know it blind and in the dark. Across a forking sea, I'll be able to scent you. OMG, Fisher, why are you so obsessed with me, right? But before Sierra could ask, there is a loud boom. 4 zombie-like creatures burst through the window. Stringy hair, creatures with white, waxy skin, gaunt cheeks, and spider-webbed black veins all over their faces. Claw-like creatures with red eyes baring their yellow teeth at the 2 main characters. Kingfisher automatically picks up his magical sword and starts swiping at this biggest one, while 2 others, a woman and a child, lunge for Sierra's. Luckily, this lady, Sierra, is well prepared because she has daggers with her strapped to her thigh. But they're too strong for her. But Kingfisher comes and saves the day, of course. What are those things? Cenorothian foot soldiers, feeders. They need silver. Those are the only things that can kill them. Then Sierra passes out from the injuries and apparently some poison from them clawing at her. After a fit full of dreams about being attacked by feeders, Sierra suddenly wakes up and she's pretty much healed thanks to the magic healers, and she's in Kingfisher's bedroom. Hello, why are you there? Is there no other beds anywhere? But nothing sexy happens here because she's still recovering from injury, but like a lovesick puppy, Fisher is there asleep on an armchair, clearly worried about her. Not that he's trying to show it or anything like that. But once she is awake, he tells her he's leaving for a week to Inra, the war camp, and commands her to stay in the bed unless she needs to use the bathroom. And because of this blood bond that they had, where he basically says you have to do everything I say, she is pretty much stuck in Kingfisher's bed until she recovers. For the record, I've never used an injury as an excuse to sneak my way into a bed. To be clear, it's not like Sierra snuck into his bed. She was unconscious after all. I've never had a problem securing myself an invite. Well, aren't we confident? Is what Kingfisher says. Well, Sierra goes, well, don't count on an invitation from me. And he goes, you're right. I don't think you will invite me when the time comes. I think you'll beg. All right, mister, you've got a bit too much confidence for me right there. So Sierra then is stuck in bed for 5 days. Her only companion is a little fox, Onyx, who comes to visit and sleep. The fire spirits brings her meals, and a healer named Tilina will come and check on her, but there are still traces of poison in her blood from the feeders, from being scratched. Finally, on the 5th day, Carrion comes in and brings Sierra her breakfast, and is basically annoying her with incessant flirting, suggesting that they could have some pretty sexy time in Fisher's bed. Pretty sure Fisher is going to be able to smell it and decapitate you, Carrion. Carrion says, yeah, Fisher also made me take a bath. Clearly it was to wash the scent of Sierra off him. See, the man is clearly jealous. I know that, you know that. But Sierra and Carrion, clueless souls in this book at this point. Fisher sent water spirits to go and scrub Carrion clean using this white clay all over his body, and apparently they paid special attention to his crotch area. Lucky for him, right? Finally, Sierra is healed and free to leave Kingfisher's bedroom and resumes her experiment. After 8 days of more experiments, still nothing. Failure after failure. Sierra is frustrated, and I am the reader am bored. But Ren shows up covered in dirt and blood, clearly from some frontline warfare, but nothing out of the ordinary for him to mention. Fisher is requesting your present for dinner again tonight. Oh my goodness, another dinner with this man. But Sierra says, I will only go if you, Ren, go too, which is fair. Not like the last dinner went so well. So she also dragged Karen along to this, which is very interesting. Why have you invited half of the household along to the meeting that was supposed to be just for you and me? Someone salty Fisher. And again, it was expected that Sierra sits at the far end of the table, but as usual, she refuses to sit there, so she goes and plonks herself onto the right side of Fisher. And for some reason, this makes Ren choke on his wine. The fork, he says. Ah, yes, Fisher goes. She has unconventional seating preferences, don't you, human? What's the big deal, guys? Why can't a girlie just sit wherever she wants? Karen offers to sit there instead, but pretty much gets his head bitten off by Fisher. Here, come sit on this side, Ren says to Sirius. But like me, Sirius is like, what difference does it make? She still has to sit next to Fisher, right, in some way. So Fisher goes, she's right. She's made her decision. Let her sit wherever she wants to sit. Okay. Really? Says Ren. Really? Fisher says. Okay, so clearly there's some significance to this seating arrangement. Maybe it's haunted, who knows, but clearly there is a big deal amongst the FAEs, but no one else knows. During dinner, it is decided that Carrie and Sirius will train with Red, which will be useful considering they are now in a war zone. And with all these feeders prowling around, jumping through windows, it is best that they know how to defend themselves. She uses a training sword, says Fisher. Clearly, he looking down on Sirius. Even though this girlie can take out 2 Queen's Guard, Sirius is insulted for him to think that she doesn't know what she's doing, but she knows how to fight. Fisher just thinks so little of humans in general, I guess. Apparently, Fisher is also an awesome ventriloquist. He has this power to speak to Sirius without moving his mouth, and it always is right up to her ear in a really creepy way. So he murmurs to her, "Eat, little Usher." He caresses his voice into her ear from a distance. "Gods, would you stop doing that? Why? I've seen the way your skin breaks out into goosebumps when I speak to you like this." That's not a good thing, mate. Goosebumps doesn't mean she's turned on. It means you're creepy. It's how this male flirts, apparently, but it seems to be working for him. Sierra and Fisher have their own conversation. She's not happy that he forced her to stay in bed invoking the blood oath, but he implies he hasn't done nothing wrong and hasn't actually taken advantage of it, because in reality, he could have forced her to do a lot more, if you get my drift. If you want some more dirty talk, I suggest you also read the book, because I'm not gonna go into it anymore here, because I'll have to start to charge you by the minute repeating what Fisher says to Sierra's in this book. Ren, who is still sitting there, almost chokes on his food from overhearing the conversation, because he also has great hearing. Did we forget that Faye can hear everything you say, Fisher? But at least that ends the dirty talk for now. Eat your dinner, Usher. We're returning to the war camp in the morning, and this time, you're coming with us. Okay, so this is where I leave you, because it's been a good amount of time, probably over an hour or so now, and in case you need to take a break, let's take one, and I need a break as well. We're about halfway through the book. Things are definitely going to start to get interesting now, so I will hopefully see you on the next one for part 2 of the Quicksilver recaps. Bye!